Alrighty, let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We appreciate you joining us today. I'm Amanda Venezia, Marketing Programs Manager at Conversica and the moderator for today's webinar, When ABM Met Conversational AI, Bringing Together Personalization and Scale. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers today, John Steinert, Chief Marketing Officer at TechTarget, and Kendra Matthews, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Conversica. Before we begin our session, let me quickly cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be sent to you via email and will also be available on demand on our website. Everyone who has joined us today will be able to ask questions throughout the presentation by adding those to the Q&A window in the chat below. So please do so at any time during the webinar. We'll try and answer as many questions as possible during our time together. However, should we run out of time, we're happy to respond directly to you following today's session. All right, let's get things started. I'd like to turn over the control here to our speaker. So Kendra and John, take it away.
Thanks, Amanda. And John, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a real pleasure. You know how interested I am in what you guys do.
Yes, that is very true. Thank you. So we're excited today to talk to you a little bit about how you can bring together the power of ABM insights and conversational AI. So John, I'm going to have you go ahead and kick us off by talking to us a little bit about the objectives of ABM and what it takes to deliver against an ABM strategy.
Okay, I'll take it from here. If you can go to the next slide, let's talk about that a little bit. You could think of this, folks, as kind of my philosophy of ABM. You might disagree with it, but it's very distinct, I think, and I try to make it clear. Start really simply by saying that the thing that differentiates, the big thing that differentiates ABM in my mind from the rest of demand gen practice and selling practice, and allocation, planning territories, and so on, is that when we talk about ABM, we talk about identifying a specific list of accounts. Sometimes we call it the ABM list. Sometimes we call it a target account list. And these accounts are a subset. They can be a very small subset. They can be a relatively large subset of your overall target addressable market or total addressable market. Usually, these accounts have a lot in common with your ideal customer profile. However, there are cases where it's about white space accounts that they may resemble an ideal customer profile, but they may be accounts that you have not been able to acquire. So there are varieties of target account lists or ABM lists out there, but they all share this idea that they're a subset of the overall accounts in your total addressable market. And now here's where it really starts to get interesting, I think. You got to ask the question of why do you have this account list? And I believe the reason you have this account list is that somebody, often in sales, sometimes collaboratively between marketing and sales, has agreed that there's something important about this account list that suggests we should be getting more revenue from it. And I call that the potential. That this list has on it accounts that have a great potential for our company, but we're underperforming. And so we come together as a team, marketing and sales, to say, we've got to do something about harvesting some more of this potential. And so we make a commitment to each other to do something different from what we do to every account, right? That's the commitment I'm talking about. The easiest way to think about it is that we agree to do more than we would do for the average account to the accounts on our account-based marketing list. And then we define what it is that we're going to do different, and we agree that we're going to take those actions. The whole purpose of this is to harvest more of the potential revenue at those accounts. So if it's not in your organization or in your programs, it's not about getting more revenue from each of those accounts. This is a little bit different from what you're doing. So that's what I think it's all about. You got an account list, you've got a team that's committed to harvesting more revenue, and that has agreed to a specific program that comprises a list of actions, a set of actions that you intend to execute end to end to capture more revenue. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And, in fact, it actually mirrors some of the findings that we found in a recent study we did just a couple of months ago. It was a third-party report. And, what we found is that overwhelmingly organizations, both marketing and sales, believe in the benefit and the power of ABM, right? They understand that, 87% of the respondents can see the value in converting more pipeline and 86% to close more deals. And what was even more interesting is that 83% of those respondents actually believe that the ABM platform, the ABM program, would help deliver that intent data to the sellers so that they can use those to help create more poignant and relevant communication to the right person at the right time in the marketplace. So, like you had mentioned, a lot of organizations, they've got their kind of ABM list out there. They've worked through kind of how sales and marketing is going to work together to try and execute against that ABM list. They all agree that there's value associated with that. But what that survey also showed is that there's a disconnect between the understanding of the value and the execution to deliver that value. Personalization and relevant communication is required, and everybody seems to agree that the challenge occurs in the ability to synthesize that data in any sort of scale. Excuse me. So delivering the right content to the right buyer at the right account at the right time through all the right channels can be very challenging at any sort of scale. And why is that? And so the survey actually shows that it's about the feasibility. So most people don't believe it's actually feasible to get a level of personalization at scale. And a large number of the respondents actually believe that the amount of data available to them was a little overwhelming. So it's not about having the right information, it's about utilizing that right information. And a lot of the respondents felt that they were overwhelmed by that. And then that reflects itself in the last piece of data there, which is only 23% of the sellers are actually using some of these insights in personalized communication with every touch, which we all know is going to drop the relevancy of that communication. So the survey showed that the challenge is around execution. Everybody believes in the strategy, everybody believes in the value associated, and a lot of organizations are doing it well in a very small set of accounts. They may have an ABM account team. That ABM account team is actually executing a level of personalized and relevant communication to a lot of the people in that account very effectively, but you can't scale that. That is just, it's a human powered activity that doesn't scale in a traditional fashion. Don't you agree, John?
Well, yeah, and so I want to unpack that a little bit more, and I want to go back to first this reality that some companies kind of have the luxury to have implemented ABM. Maybe they've been at it for a while, to have implemented it in a very kind of perfection-oriented style with a dedicated ABM team and a very small number of accounts. And I think back in the early days of ABM, that was kind of the approach that people got attracted to because it was so clear the relationship between serving these accounts better and having a dedicated team whose job that was so that they could focus on that and that alone. That set up the kind of ideal case, which frankly, for many companies, our own included, is very, very difficult to say. I've got a dedicated team of a number of people who are really doing highly personalized communications defined by personalization to this specific single account. So I wanted to unpack the idea of personalization a little bit more. To get at what you raised here, Kendra. And the first part is that, folks, when we say personalization, we do not mean sort of friendly banter. We do not mean the person's name and where they went to college from their LinkedIn and some of the hobbies they're interested in. That's the notion of personalization that is really potentially effective over in B2C and partially in B2B after you get to know somebody. But my opinion is that if you're going to be asking somebody for time, at a minimum, to read your email, maybe to pick up the phone and listen to you, the personalization we're looking for is focused on what is that prospect or customer's needs. Now, I agree that personalization at scale, especially against a business need, is very difficult if you think of it in terms of how you've usually done things. But part of what today is about thinking about, can this be done in ways that you haven't really imagined? And I think that's what we're going to hear more about.
That's exactly right, John. Personalization in this type of scenario is really understanding the problems that particular individual is facing to deliver against their goals from a business opportunity perspective, and being able to create messaging and connect with that person around those problems at the right time, in the right stage of their investigation and research. So, with that, what can marketers realistically do to execute on their ABM strategy more effectively and at scale?
So let's go to the next slide, and I'll try to unpack this one. If you look all the way over the right there, let me start with fundamentally part of a marketer's job, a large part of a marketer's job is to communicate. And philosophically, I believe, and Kendra, you and I, when we were preparing this, I think we both agreed that if communications can be better, then more communication is not a bad thing. And I know a little bit later, we're going to talk about areas actually in the customer lifecycle where we are super confident there is not enough communication. So our philosophy, I think, in this presentation is that actually marketers need to communicate more. Selling organizations need to communicate more with target accounts. There's an assumption there that this is going to be better communication, and that ties into this word relevance or relevancy. So if you have the information necessary to do relevant communication, more communication is going to be better. So we increase the frequency. And then there is a real marketing idea here that if your objective is in ABM, one of your objectives to make sure that these accounts are familiar with you and start to emotionally prefer you, then your communication must be consistent pattern, a consistent tone, and a consistent quality in that communication. So these are really three very important concepts here that are, part and parcel of ABM as I would want to execute it.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's about communicating more, but you can't just communicate more in the same way you've always done it. It's really about the relevancy. If not, you're just spamming these customers. And that's going to be something that turns those accounts off, not turns them on and gets them more engaged. So really, it's about bringing those insights, bringing the knowledge together, both at a contact level and at an account level, and being able to action that information in a way and that allows consistency, frequency, and relevancy. Completely agree, John. One of the things that we talked about when we were preparing this is, how we should define engagement, and specifically how it relates to ABM versus how that, engagement might be different to a traditional, lead-based marketing. You want to talk to that a little bit, John?
Yeah, I do. I know that I may have confused you in our last discussions about how I think of it, so I'm going to try to simplify it a little bit. I'm not arguing that lead-based marketing doesn't get you to engagement, but I am going to argue that most folks don't have enough leads for that to be the total read that they get from the accounts on their ABM list. And so I will propose that part of doing more and doing it better with ABM is to have more account engagement. More engagement with more people, or engagement with more people, more engagement over time with that account. Because I fundamentally believe that the more you can engage that account with you, or you can engage with that account, the more they will understand how you can help their business, the more they will look to you to help their business, and the more they will reduce their kind of choice set that they hold in their minds about potential suppliers to solve a particular problem. And so the way we go about doing that is to drive more engagement, awareness, yes, advertising awareness, if we can do very targeted advertising, but much further beyond that, a one-to-one engagement between your company and the target account. And in order to do that, you have to do a lot more communication. And the point of all this is really critical here. The point is to give your sellers more opportunity to identify opportunities in the account, and to reduce the chance that if there are opportunities in the account, that you will miss them. So as you all know, nothing gets into pipeline unless the sales team identifies it as an opportunity. And so we've got to engage the account so that the salespeople, and Kendra mentioned the idea of getting more insights to the salespeople. She called it more intent data, so that they can see the opportunities taking shape there, and they will put it into pipeline, because only that way can you begin to get more revenue.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think that, in traditional lead-based engagement, a lot of times what we're trying to do is identify whether a particular contact or a lead is actually a good fit. Are they the right fit? Is it the right point in time? Whereas in ABM, really, you've already chosen this particular account. You want to engage with them. So like you mentioned, it's about getting a critical mass of engagement with all the right people and all the people within that particular organization, so that you can move it towards a level of dialogue and a level and an opportunity that sales can engage with.
So did you hear that? I mean, that's a super important point. None of these accounts would be on your ABM list if you hadn't pre-qualified them.
Right.
And so every signal you get from these accounts is valuable to you, because you're starting to help you to figure out how to get in the door. So our sales teams need more ways in, and they need much more visibility. And that's part of marketing's job here.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is we conduct a survey every year around kind of what is good engagement. It really bases around 4 pillars, right? It's persistence, personalization, promptness, and performance. And why I bring this up is that, human level engagement is fraught with inconsistency, right? And individuals are human. And so they have conflicting priorities. They have things that draw their attention away from activities. And, sometimes we simply just miss things. And so in this survey, even with ABM becoming such a critical aspect to so many organizations, we're still seeing that, the persistence of outreach is still, 3 to 4 communications, and then they move on. We're still seeing organizations take a day to respond to, inbound leads or any sort of engagement with that particular brand. And organizations are only hitting the inbox, i.e. the spam rate is very high. They're only hitting that inbox 12% of the time, which means that there's serious performance issues associated with that too. And The last one is around this personalization aspect. And, we kind of talked about personalization being more than the traditional, hey, it's your name, it's your title. It's really about finding what that particular organization it is, the challenges they faced, and what that particular persona that you're trying to communicate with, the challenge and the opportunities that your brand has to solve that problem. And so I think that's a good kind of segue, John, into our next slide, which really kind of tees up the value of conversational AI in assisting these organizations against an ABM strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well. For me, on these 4 points, I really focus on, as a data guy, as a leading provider of intent data, I'm really focused here on this deeper level of personalization, defined as being relevant, because that's what I can help with. And then I'm looking to others. I'm looking to the people on the marketing team to take advantage of that. And I'm struggling with helping SDRs and marketing people doing nurturing. I'm struggling to get them to think of their communication as two-way, for example, to figure out how to have greater reach and the capacity to do more communication, to be frequent, and to do it with consistency. And that's what I'm really struggling with. And that's the whole, for me, that's the whole purpose of getting together with Conversica and doing presentations like this, because I'm looking for a better way than what I have to do it today. Yeah. I don't have a big enough team. I don't have enough people. The people are subject to burnout in terms of, how often they're going to try to reach somebody. They think of it as pounding away, which is really a statement to their ability to find additional value to confer to the recipient and so forth. So people don't seem to be the solution here, is what I'm saying, Kendra.
Yeah, especially if you're talking about scale. So, we mentioned that, before, organizations may have found like the answer when it comes to personalization by developing an ABM or by, resourcing an ABM specific team, but trying to take those learnings and those, expertise and take that to a larger portion of the ABM list is really, really hard. But if you look at what those success metrics are for an ABM team, it really comes down to these 4 things, right? Which is what conversational AI can bring to the balance of those accounts. That deeper level of personalization and relevance, that one is so key. And it's why conversations like this, like you mentioned, John, are so important. It's how does a tool like a conversational AI tool take that insight and synthesize it like a human would, right? Figure out how to action that on a consistent basis and autonomously, right? And it's not going to add a whole lot of scale if it's just funneling any sort of interest over to the sales team, who then now has to try and qualify every single one of those like they're doing today with inbound. Really, the value of having that two-way dialogue and being able to answer questions and validate interest and qualify a particular contact, or even identify additional contacts within that account that would need to be engaged in an opportunity, that can all be done by a conversational AI assistant. And of course, these guys, they never take breaks. They never go on vacation. They can work pretty much 24/7. So their capacity is pretty unlimited. And AI in general, what is it really good at? It's really good at frequency, consistency, that automatic robotic type of activity. That's where we excel. So obviously conversational AI plus those ABM insights is a way for organizations to scale beyond those very top tier accounts. But how do they actually kind of work together? So John, I want to, tee this up for you to talk a little bit about how that data comes in and starts to get executed or used by a tool like conversational AI?
Yeah, so this term ABM platform means a lot of different things. On the one hand, it's a kind of automation capability that will help you execute kind of more aspects of the play. And that you can think of that as a specific automation-oriented type of application. But another part of it is the idea of data, and data in the form of buying signals, data in the form of account insights, more so than contact data and account data. I think when I think about contact data and account data, I'm thinking that's pretty good table stakes. That's got to be in your CRM. That's got to be in your map. But in both your CRM and your marketing automation platform aren't particularly good sources of a lot of signals. And we're now talking about, in order to do more personalized, more valuable communication for your audience, ramping up the types of signals we use. So they're buying signals, they're account insights, also based on behavior. And these are coming in from second-party intent. And they may be coming in from third-party intent, behavioral data. So if you move to the middle here, some of those buying signals trigger immediate outreach from sales. They certainly should. If they're really true positive signals and they're high intensity and they're widespread in the account, those signals should trigger a focus coming from sales. But other signals add data, they augment data. And to my way of thinking, this informs sort of micro-segmentation in the life cycle, for example, micro-segmentation in the buying group itself. What personas are actually engaging with you or are engaging with topics that are relevant to you and relevant to them. These types of signals are the insights we're talking about that enhance the potential for personalization, for more relevant, more frequent communication. But it's one thing to have these signals, it's another to execute. And so over to you, Kendra, on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you highlighted some of those things, right? So, the buying signals, and it could be different for a lot of different organizations, right? But you can define kind of how you want both your sellers and a conversational AI solution like Conversica to respond to those signals. So in some situations, you may say, okay, it's one of the top 10 accounts, therefore, no matter what happens, it's going to go directly to sales. You may define, that there are particular signals that are considered hotter than others. So even if it's not that top 10, maybe it does go directly to sales. Whereas a lot of other buying signals or activities that happen within that account can trigger an engagement by a conversational AI assistant. And what we're doing on the back end is we're matching that particular account, that particular contact to the most appropriate, the most relevant conversation through, like you said, kind of that micro segmentation. So you may take it by industry, by persona, by business challenge, by, whatever attributes you deem appropriate, and we're going to filter them to that appropriate conversation. Now, within that conversation, how that content is generated is going to be based on a series of variables that an organization is going to define. And those variables can be hyper personalized for that particular micro segment. So again, it's just like what a person is going to do when they see a trigger that comes in. They're going to go and they're going to start to look through all of those buying signals, all of the, first, second, and third, attributions or signals that might be coming in, and information and insights that might be coming in from these different sources. And they're going to figure out how to tailor that particular engagement, that conversation with that contact. So Conversica has created a way to automate that process so that the AI assistant can autonomously reach out based on kind of those business rules that an organization identifies.
So I kind of think that we should go to the next slide, because there's this great segue in the thinking here that I think brings it more to life. And I will try to start it out. I hope I don't confuse it too much, because there is some setup here. I want to make sure that I get to this idea of the two-way dialogue and promptness and stuff. So what you're seeing here, folks, is a picture based on sort of a Topo Gartner idea. If you look towards the right, you see that there's a single representation, a single horizontal flow. And that's speaking to the idea that there is a sales pipeline where both ABM and broad-based demand gen are going to funnel into. But on the left side, the green is an ABM thought, and the blue is a demand gen thought. And so from the perspective of setting up, doing both things, ABM and demand gen, the purpose of this slide was originally to show that, well, the sales actions, once something has become pipeline, are relatively the same. Okay, so that's the long-winded way of saying, why are you seeing this complex thing? But the important thing here for me to look at is that when Kendra's talking about, or when Kendra and I are both talking about doing more frequent communication and prompt two-way dialogue, we're actually talking about a type of communication as things flow from left to right that's quite different from how one would think if you were only thinking about, I'm doing marketing nurture and I'm doing sales follow-up. There is a lot of communication, in fact, that we could be doing and in an ABM motion should be doing that we otherwise don't do. And so what Conversica is now helping me understand is there are these things that if I could do them, I would, but since I haven't been able to do them for so long, I just don't do them. And so I was going to let Kendra walk us through kind of three of those things that are not so typically kind of core to the communication that marketing's involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is, especially when you're talking about ABM, you're talking about the desire for most of these organizations to scale beyond, their top tier accounts. It's this idea of using a AI assistant to complement a lot of the sales efforts that are already going on. So, no doubt that the best way to engage is going to be to have a human engage directly with those contacts within an account. And that is viable for, like we've been talking about, that very, very top tier. But because an AI assistant can have a very relevant conversation with, say, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 accounts, what it allows an organization to do is to soften those beachheads, right? To really engage with a lot more of these accounts and a lot more people within these accounts at a scale that they just couldn't do human powered alone. And you're doing it in a way that is not a traditional nurture program, right? It's not just trying to send them a bunch of content. Rather, it's about connecting with them on the particular problems that they face based on what we know about that account. And so just like it would, an SDR is trying to break into these accounts, this AI assistant is using that same, type of information to break into these accounts in a very human-like dialogue and have the ability to have that conversation back and forth. So now you've gone from, touching 10, 15, 20, that first tier ABM accounts to now touching, 200, 2,000 accounts on a consistent basis in a way that's going to increase the engagement of a number of contacts within that account.
Yeah, I mean, I would extend the multiplication even further. So
yeah,
let's say your ABM program is 1,000 accounts, and usually these accounts tend to be on the larger side. That's why we think they have high potential for revenue, among other things, like technographic and firmographic fit, and they might be in industries that we've succeeded in and so forth. But You take 1,000 of these accounts, it's fair to say that there are 100 important people in there. Could be 1,000 important people in there. And so there's no way you can cover them with sales motions. Definitely. You can try to cover them with standard marketing motions, but most of them will be unresponsive. You're going to get a few signals from those folks. So if you could cover them with an AI assistant, how would you fuel that to make it personal? Well, there's two ways. One is you take second-party intent data, which has a lot more signals than you're ever going to get in first-party, and you use that to inform the assistant. And the other piece is you take learning about what are typically the jobs to be done, the things that people need help with when they're trying to decide to solve a business problem, and you anticipate that. And you create outbound conversations that are hinting at that somebody might need help. And it can be somebody in a variety of different personas. So you can create conversations that actually speak specifically to the different personas in your buying center or in your buying group. And so you've got conversations for financial questions, finance people, conversations for technical people, conversations for business people, conversations, I imagine, for procurement people. Do you have a library with procurement conversations?
We have a library with a lot of conversations. In fact, our conversation library is one of our key differentiators, right? We've got over 600 different conversations, and each one of those can be tailored, like to your point, to different industries, different personas, different challenges. But what we've done in our philosophy around the creation of this content library is quite different than a lot of those in the industry, in that we believe that the level of expertise to define a conversation workflow, to train those intents, to determine the next best action, is a skill set that not every organization has built out today. And so by us doing the heavy lifting of building that on behalf of our customers, and then providing them with the ability to tailor that by modifying these variables that are then used in a dynamic fashion in these conversations, really marries the idea of speed to market and value against the idea of a fully customized solution. We hear often from customers who have joined us from other solutions that the creation and the maintenance of conversations is exponentially more harder than they had ever assumed, because it's different. It's very different than nurture. It's not about writing an email, right? You have to train the AI engine. You have to determine the next best steps. And so we really have empowered our customers to get to market a whole lot faster with this conversation library.
So let's go to the next thing, and I'm just going to reiterate what you said, because we have some similarities, I think, in our company, even though we're a little bit older. So let's go to the next slide, Kendra. And okay. I'm just going to reiterate that. So what I heard Kendra alluding to is, I think, the importance of experience in a particular kind of field and experience in techniques. And you could say experience is always good, but depending on the type of company that you might be looking to get help from, experience means different things. In our case, as an intent data provider, the fact that we've been in business and been successful for 22 years has allowed us to build up this gigantic audience of people who keep coming back for the editorial content that we produce. And it's that audience that tends to use our content in decision support, that is, to make buying decisions, that gives us rich intent at the person level. And so the person level intent is what it differentiates us from other intent suppliers, and it's what speaks specifically to hyper personalization here. Now, experience and how it affects speed to market on Kendra's side or on Conversica's side is a little bit different, but I think it's fascinating when you think about how AI works. AI gets better over time, right, Kendra? And
yeah,
so
exactly.
that's kind of what you're trying to talk about in terms of speed to market and why you guys are better.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've covered quite a bit of that. I think that the way we're going about utilizing the information and the insights that may come from not just, a CRM, but from an ABM platform and some of these, intent data that comes and flows through is pretty unique in the industry. So it's not just about, taking that information to determine who to reach out to. It's using that information to tailor the most relevant conversation and do it in a way that's highly scalable. And so bringing together that account insight, the contact level, behaviors that it has been surfaced through that ABM platform and that insight engine to deliver the most appropriate and most relevant conversation to an individual is what we're doing with this ABM solution. I think, your point about time and market, I think it's incredibly relevant when you talk about AI. AI is a machine learning model, right? And so it takes time and interactions to do that. And with over 1 billion interactions under our belt, we've got a very sophisticated AI engine that gives us the unique ability to engage contacts in that dynamic, human-like two-way conversation. And so pulling together the fact that we are using that intent data to help inform those conversations, that a customer can tailor and customize the variables that are utilized in a particular conversation, and the fact that our sophisticated AI engine is able to do this dynamically and autonomously really does differentiate Conversica against a lot of the other solutions that are out there in the marketplace.
So let's go to close so we can get some questions in.
Absolutely.
And you and I can sum it up. So I think we agree that not only the concept of ABM, but ABM executed energetically works. But in order for it to work, it needs a way for any practitioner to drive more engagement. And that more engagement is going to require more communication, but not just marketing communication or sales communication. Lots of actually subtle differences that I kind of suggested was communication that we kind of historically have taken off the table because we couldn't do it, right? Communication with personas who are not buyers per se, but they could be blockers. Communication about how is the interaction going? How are you feeling about us? Do you need any more help? That's like customer service communication pre-sale that we can't do, right? Because we don't have the people to do it. But would be really useful, if somebody knows you're there for them, even if they're not sure they're going to do a project, they can reach back out to you. So you've got to reach out to them and give them the opportunity to reach back. It's more than marketing and sales communication, I would say. It's better communication, and I think more communication. And then lastly, there is this fundamental assumption that for communication to be valuable, it has to be personalized to the needs of the target, to their needs from the elements of the purchase they're involved in, from the stages of the purchase, from their relationship to a potential organization, a potential supplier, from where they sit in their organization, all those things. The thing that it's a real bugbear of mine is that this is not personal information about the person. It's business-oriented information. It's helping them with their job. It's helping them as professionals. It is not weekend talk.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, I think that the key here is to deliver against the promise of ABM to deliver, more revenue and more predictable revenue streams. You really have to implement ABM at scale. And to do that, you you need a conversational AI solution, some way to scale beyond just a human scale, because you're not going to get to the level that you need. So any last comments, John, before we open it up for questions?
Nope, I'll just tag team on that one and say that, yeah, you need a conversational AI and you need a lot more data, better data to deliver it. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So we're going to, thank you, John. We're going to go ahead and open it up for some questions. If you do have any questions, go ahead and add them to the Q&A section. While you guys are engaging, I'll just ask, a common question that we often get, which is, why do we need a conversational AI solution over above kind of a marketing automation platform? We've invested a ton of money in our stack, our MarTech stack already. Why is another tool needed? And, it's a good question. And I think it comes back to the fact that an AI assistant is autonomously, it augments your workforce to autonomously work on your behalf, to have a dialogue with these contacts, right? So a marketing nurture program allows you to kind of dribble out information, try and get that right information into the right people's hands. But an AI assistant really augments the work that your sales team, your SDRs are doing in a lot of cases, and allows allows the AI assistant to autonomously engage in with those contacts in a way a nurture program never will. And so it provides scale, and it really helps to remove a lot of the repetitive and monotonous activities that a sales rep does end up having to do in a lot of these activities.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think I got two perspectives. One is that I really have to admit to myself that while there are wonderful aspects to marketing automation, that it's brought to the ability to communicate broadly, that marketers always wanted, broadly, but with some granularity, so different from advertising. We've got more flexibility with marketing automation. It's still a very blunt instrument. So if I look forward 5-10 years, I'm thinking we're not going to use the marketing automation platforms we have. We're actually going to replace them with much, much more granularity. And so I'm looking forward to where AI, machine learning, powered by data, is actually going to be doing our nurture streams for us. And so that's going to be a different world. But speaking to today, why do you need something like this in addition to what you have? I would say there's a business argument for it too, that you can build. And it's based on, if we could communicate more frequently, we think that we could engage better with this ABM list. We think we could make greater discoveries about opportunities in the accounts and get more than our share of them. And that this will actually reduce our need for blunt force scale in the SDR space. So if we tried to do the same thing using SDRs, it would cost much more than if we take the leap right now and get to an AI kind of oriented conversational platform.
Yeah, John, that's a really important point. I can't believe I didn't bring that up, because in most cases, the return on investment is months, not years with Conversica, because when you do look at both the volume you add, the velocity of some of those leads or contacts that move through the funnel, and the pipeline that's generated based on that, our customers see a very, very high return on investment. And they're able to, like you mentioned, you augment the activities that are already out there. And so it's not about building a whole new team of people. It's around, augmenting your workforce. So great point. Amanda, any other questions?
We do. A few are coming in. So again, reminder, if you guys have any questions, throw those into the Q&A chat below. This one looks like a good question for John. So John, intent data focuses on accounts. In your experience, is that enough for the personalization we need to aim for here?
Well, so that's a really good question. So if you think about kind of the intent revolution that's been going on for the past 4 or 5 years, I could see how you might think that intent data as a whole is about account data. And I would argue that most of that intent data is not very good for personalization of the type that we're talking about. Personalization that's better than personalization at the account level. But there is a type of intent data that's generated through a permission relationship with folks that allows you to get to the person level. And so this is intent data that comes from publishers like TechTarget, where we have a reg wall that prevents people from getting all the content that they might want from us to support the research they need to do when they're buying a solution. We put up the reg wall, they give us the information, there's an explicit request for permission to share that with our clients. And so that gives us the ability to see at the person level what their issues are, what they're looking at. We know everything that's published on our network. We know what it's about. It's tagged at a very deep level. So we can tell you what Kendra cares about in ABM, different from what John cares about in ABM at the same account, for example. So what this lets you do is actually determine what types of conversation, what types of messaging to do to specific people. And what Conversica has, because they've shown this to me, is the ability to take basic templates that say a relevant conversation about current pain points, and then insert those pain point information right from the intent data into the Conversica conversation. So let me be very clear. Most intent data is at the account level. That's not good enough. Some intent data, including the first party data at most of your guys' companies, the first party data, that's data in your systems, is at the person level. That's the data you need to look for to do highly personalized conversations of the type we were talking about.
Terrific. All right, here's another one, maybe good for both of you. So we all get too much email. It sounds to me like you guys are advocating spam. Can you comment on that, please?
You want to take that, or you want me to take it first?
Well, I'll take it first. I can completely agree with that. It feels like we get way too much email. And more often than not, it has nothing to do with me. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is around relevancy, right? So the more that a communication looks like a human-like generated communication that's highly relevant to that person, the less like spam it's going to be. And so I think it comes back to, it's not necessarily around volume, it's about relevancy. Don't you agree, John?
Yeah. So I want to add to that in a couple of ways, which, I hope you're getting the idea that I'm a little bit opinionated about this stuff. I don't think that we're going to be able to, even through legislation, reduce the volume of email messages that we get. I think that inherently there's something about communications channels that tends to more communication rather than less. But there is something that's happening on the recipient side that I think is very interesting. There's a comfort level with more communication and also a comfort level with less response. Let me try to explain what I mean. I come from a generation where I'm very uncomfortable with not getting a response. So call it the telephone generation, where the phone would ring in your house and somebody had to pick it up. That's very different from a generation where you post things on Instagram and you'd like people to give thumbs up, but you don't necessarily, well, I hope, you don't require an instant response. I know in my family, a lot of the WhatsApp communications, some people respond, some people don't. But the point is that you've put it out there, because if the people you want to share it with do pick it up, it will add something to their lives. So what I'm saying here is, what I think we are definitely recommending more communication. We're recommending communication that's informed by data that could and should be useful to the recipient. But that doesn't mean we have to expect them to respond to every message. That's the point I'm trying to get across here. We're not saying one-to-one response. We're saying be present, help them, and when they need you, they will respond. So there is a ratio here of, we're saying more outbound, and don't necessarily expect response rates that you would typically die for from your demand gen programs. That brings up an interesting point, Kendra. Can you talk to response rates?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a really important point. I was going to chime back in. It's, because the way that the Conversica AI assistant engages, and the fact that it's very human-like, our engagement rate, our response rate is way better than people see even in a click rate of a nurture email. I mean, an average response rate can be in the 10% range, and we've seen it as high as 50%. That means 50% of the AI assistant's communication that go back, somebody responds to. So I think that, even though you don't expect all of them to respond, I think, again, it comes to the relevancy and how poignant that particular message is to that individual. And from a Conversica perspective, our goal is to get people to respond, to start that dialogue, to propel them into action. And so, thanks for teeing that one up, John. I noticed, Amanda, we got another one.
I saw that, and that kind of goes off of kind of a good leeway into this question. So when you speak about being able to automate conversations, what medium does Conversica use to accomplish this? Is it email?
Well, email is a big part of it, but it is not the only one. We've also got website chat. So it's the ability to engage in a two-way dialogue on your website. We use SMS, and we're quickly building out a whole lot of additional channels like web chat, WhatsApp, and some of the social messaging channels as well. And so it is an omni-channel solution, and we have found that the ability to engage with an individual across a number of platforms increases the chances of them actually, engaging and responding to an AI assistant.
Terrific. All right. Well, I think that may be the end of our questions, and we are almost at the top of the hour. So I would like to take a moment and thank everybody for joining us today, including our speakers, John Steiner and Kendra Matthews. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week and enjoys the upcoming holidays. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.